I'm inviting some folks up with me, and as they do, let me bring us up to speed. So, if you were with us here last week, we started a new series called Life with God. This is kind of the New Year series for me. This is an important series. When we talk about our faith at Journey, one of the things we always want to emphasize, and we believe it's one of the most important things that exist, is this understanding that you discover a life with God. We believe that's the most important thing that can happen if and when you come to Journey. We really believe that. And so we started this conversation last week, and to do it, we went all the way back to the beginning, because when you talk about life with God, there's a phrase that's kind of been associated with that. It's called a relationship with Jesus Christ, right? A personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It's a great phrase, but let's be honest. What does it really mean? We have lost some of that in our culture and even in the church today. So I think this understanding about life with God that's been hitched to this personal relationship with Jesus, I think it's a little muddy. I think that's part of the reason we struggle sometimes with our faith the way we do. So we went all the way back to the beginning. We started in Genesis, and we looked at how when we decided to make a decision to live our life without God, right? So instead of being with God, we chose to be like God, right? The serpent said, "Hey, come eat this fruit, and you'll be like Him." So we said, well, "I don't want to be with God. I want to be like Him." And that was our sin. That was our rebellion. And when we did that, it fractured all of our relationships. We automatically, I think most of us go, "Well, yeah, we've fractured my relationship with God," but it fractured your relationship with other people, right? With yourself, with creation. I mean, it broke every relationship that we have. So from Genesis 4 going forward, there's this conversation about what it looks like as God reveals Himself to His creation again, to mankind, and says, "I've got a solution for this." The solution came to fruition with Christ, right? That's why we talk about Jesus like we do. But getting to that solution, we get really confused, I think, a lot of times about what it means. So yes, we now have the ability to say yes to God, to walk with Him, but what does that look like? So last week we set us up. I told you that the greatest purpose you can discover in your life is that you are to have a relationship with God. You are to walk with God. That's the greatest purpose you can have. This week, I want to take the conversation a little bit further, and I've invited some friends up here that I'll introduce, but I want to take this conversation a little bit further, I think, to a pivotal place. And let me tell you what I mean by that. This week, I sat with these friends around a table, and this message changed several times. Because in my head, I kept thinking, oh, here's the next natural step we should go into. And I kept getting stuck, and they helped me unwind this. Because most of us, if we talk about life with God or a faith, we want to rush over to the happy place, right? Because we all come to God for a reason. We've got some things that we want met in our lives, some needs. And so most of us, we come to God expecting great things. And in that is where we're missing a very, I think, pivotal part of our faith. So this morning, here's where I want to start us. We're gonna start with this idea. Have you ever been dissatisfied in your life? Have you ever been dissatisfied with your faith? Have you ever been dissatisfied with God, or maybe the answers it feels like that He's giving you? I know that sounds like a heavy conversation. By the end of the morning, I hope we get you to a place that you understand a greater freedom when we answer this or we talk about it. And I say answer as if there's one pat answer. We're going to chuckle about this all morning up here. But the reality is, most of us, when we come to God, we expect something that we don't get. And when dissatisfaction comes into our lives, when life's not working, right? When there's a general dissatisfaction, then we start to wonder, is God even listening to us? Is He hearing us? Where is He? You ever have a marriage not work? You ever have a child give you problems, and you pray for that child, and you just think, well, God, where are you? Like, well, number one, why did I have this child to begin with? And then two, how do I deal with the child? Or you've got trouble at your job, or maybe it's just something. It's like that every day, that nagging, like life just isn't working for me, right? So here are the questions that I hope we get to over the next few minutes this morning. If God is present, or is God present when I'm dissatisfied in my life? Is He even there? Uh, is there a bigger purpose to my dissatisfaction in life? That's where I want us to go. So now most of you let me introduce. Most of you know my wife, of course. She has led this conversation with me over the last few years as we have been digging in more and more of trying to understand what it means to walk with God. And so she brings a lot of wisdom to this conversation. Sitting next to her is Debbie and Kurt Swindoll. Debbie and Kurt have been with Journey not quite a year yet. And they have just been a huge blessing. They have a ministry that's been around for 10 years or so, Grafted Life Ministries. We didn't know this, but over 2 years ago, my wife heard about this Bible study. And she goes, I'm hearing these great things. We talked about it. It sounded like this kind of conversation that I just presented to you, that it goes a little bit further than just, it's not that, look, studying the Bible is a great thing, but most of us right now live in an information overload. And so we were asking the question, how do we not just have information, but have formation come out of that information? So we were looking for more. And she discovered this Grafted Life Bible study. And so we started this study with a group of ladies here, and it meets on Monday nights, and they're in actually the last semester. It's a progressive thing. So you have to do them one right after the other. And there's 5 or 6 ladies that have gone through all 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. And we didn't even know Kurt and Debbie at the time. And then after that, Sue had this opportunity she ran into Kurt and Debbie at this little meeting they were having, talking about the Bible studies. And then about halfway, I don't know, maybe the week after that, she looks at me and she goes, hey, Kurt and Debbie are coming to Journey. And I was like, no, like these are smart people. Why are they coming here? And they showed up and they haven't left. And so can I start this conversation this way? And Debbie, I'm going to go straight to you. In our conversations this week, and it's come up more and more, you've talked about how most of us as people of faith, if we have a faith, or if we're even looking for faith, looking for God, how clueless we really are about what it means to walk with God. That there's so many things that have been ingrained in us from our culture, from our family of origins, from just the world we've grown up in, that you made this statement this week, and I've said this before, that a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. In your book, and by the way, a lot of this conversation is coming from this book, Do You Love Me, that Debbie put together. And I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But in that book, you tell a story about kind of an awareness you came to while observing your grandson, or thinking about your grandson and your relationship with your grandson. Can you tell that story and talk to us about how does that relate to this idea of I don't always know what I don't know, and why is that important, if you will?
Well, 7.5 years ago, my first grandson was born, and he was born in Southern California, and I lived in Dallas. Well, you can imagine, like, I'd looked forward to being a grandmother, and it was painful that he was going to be born there, but nonetheless, we traveled there. I didn't really know what it was going to feel like to be a grandmother. You know, you kind of have to experience that, and he was born, and we walked in, and he was just so beautiful, and I just had this reaction to him, and I looked in his little face, and I just spontaneously said, Wesley, if you'll move to Dallas, Grammy will buy you a pony. And it was just, but I had this just kind of overwhelming thing, like, oh, it's going to be so sad to not live by this little boy. And as I thought about that later, and just in relationship to our relationship with God, I thought, you know, I'm a 50-something woman who's had a lot of relationships, and I've had children, and I know what that feels like to look at the milestones of their lives. And so I carried this relational knowledge, but he was just a baby. He didn't know, he didn't come out of the womb thinking, I'm really going to miss living by my grandma. It was nothing to him. So if I was far away, for the most part, unless, you know, he had those experiences of me where he thought Grammy was the best thing ever and I wanted to be closer to her, he wasn't expecting that. Like, he didn't know what he didn't know. And that's a lot like our relationship with God, especially as we live in these environments where, you know, without God is normal. You know, I think about Adam and Eve, and it's like they lived in the garden with God. So when they left, they knew what they were missing because they had that experience. But their kids never lived in the garden, and their kids never lived in the garden, and so on until you get to us. Because we never lived in the garden, without God is normal. We don't know what we don't know. And that can be a problem for us when we get invited back into this with God life, because we don't know what that's supposed to be like.
Yeah, and I guess so. I'm gonna claim a little bit of ownership here as a pastor. I do feel like some of the problem falls on the leaders in the church. I'm gonna own that right here because in the information age where I can podcast and broadcast things and throw information out, and then also in an age that moves further and further down the road if we measure everything and we have to celebrate wins and what does a win look like and I mean behind the scenes pastors have conversations. How do you measure if your church is doing well? And it always comes down to, well, how many people attend and how big is your budget, right? And so all of these things, and then unfortunately, well-meaning pastors will stand in front of you and invite you to, well, if you come to Jesus, everything's going to be all right. Just kind of give this glossary, paint this picture of look, Jesus is the answer to everything. It's all going to work out that way. I want Sue to read a passage from Matthew 11 because I do think even in the Gospels, I think you can read it and walk away thinking that the answer is easier than maybe it is. Matthew 11:28, Jesus is talking. Honey, read that passage for us.
Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
So Jesus paints this picture, Kurt, of that it just seems easy. I mean, I know that yoke. Understand the teaching. The yoke was a rabbi's teaching, so it was all of his teaching. So I understand there's a bigger image there. But when we read that, I mean, those of us who, man, maybe somebody here, it's been weeks or maybe years since it's felt like anything has been light in their life, even not just their faith. We talk about that. What's he talking about, and how are we missing it possibly?
Yeah, I remember the first time that I really had a realization that maybe the Christian life I'm living, the experience I'm having with God, is not all there is. I mean, it's really hard. I mean, how does a baby come to that realization that Debbie just described? You know, what does it take? And I think that passage was a key one for me. And as I've talked with others about it, the invitation, the question I've asked them is, does the Christian life feel easy and light? Do you? I grew up in the church. I grew up listening to lots of great sermons and getting a lot of principles out of that and things that I should remember or think about or do the next week. And the next week it was another list. And the week after that, another list and another list. And after just 1 year of that, you've got dozens and dozens and dozens of things to do and remember and think about and try harder with. And I remember contrasting that feeling of what Christian life kind of felt like to me against this passage that says, no, my way is easy and light. I thought, then I'm missing something. I'm fundamentally missing something about this relationship. When we don't know what we don't know, we assume that we've got it. And this is like all there is. And so it's tough to come to that point of self-realization where I wonder if this isn't all it is. I wonder if there's something that I don't know. Did I get sidetracked someplace? Did I just not understand it? So I think this is the tough part for a lot of us, especially if you've spent any time in the church. There's been kind of a simplification of the message, in a way. You move into this relationship with God, and then it's just about learning and about trying. And so for me, a lot of this was changing this perception of an outward in. If I change the things on the outside, if I try harder with the things on the outside, then maybe at some point my heart changes. I guess that's how it works. And this was, wow, what if there's an inward heart change that makes all the outward stuff easy and light? So for me, this was a part of my journey in beginning to come to that realization that maybe the way I had kind of classically understood the Christian life was off in some way.
Yeah, so I put it in a phrase, and this will be one of just a couple things. You'll notice we don't have a big outline today, but this phrase is how I've tried to capture it. That dissatisfaction, what if your dissatisfaction is an invitation to understand your brokenness and Jesus' heart in a deeper way? What if, right? We just sang that song, He's Never Going to Let Me Down. Well, the reality is you're going to have terrible days in your life. So can you have a terrible day and God still not let you down? And then what does that look like? That's what we're digging into here. Because again, the culture we live in paints it. Let's be brutally honest with each other. We tend to run from one hyped up setting to the next in our culture. And we're constantly just having a rah-rah session about how great life is. And if something goes south, we dare not tell anybody because it means that we're not who they think we are, right? And so that is the struggle when you see Jesus get all these people together and he's continually being criticized because he's got all the lowest of the low. He's got all the people who are vocally admitting, yeah, I'm that person. I'm the sinner. I'm the prostitute. I'm the tax collector. I'm the liar. And they're all flocking to him. And all the religious people are going, well, you got the wrong people around you. And Jesus is going, no, this is the thing. So like Kurt said, what is it that we've missed something? That there's something inwardly. So the first thing I want to do real quick is, and if you would like to, I would invite you to close your eyes for just a second, like we're going to pray. You don't have to. If that feels weird, don't worry about it. Sometimes I do that as an exercise so that you don't think about the person next to you. But if you would just for a second, would you consider, after hearing Debbie's story, would you consider that God as your father, as your grandfather possibly, like she was a grandmother to this little boy, would you consider that he has more for you maybe than what you've ever thought about? Would you consider that in the middle of all the dissatisfaction, the things that are not good in your life, that God is still there with you? Would you consider that he's walking with you through that pain, that he doesn't ever leave you? And the measure of him is not the absence of pain, but it's that something else is happening in your heart, that you're noticing a transformation, that even when things are bad, you still have this unique confidence that he's there. And that walking with him like that actually starts to change everything on the outside. Okay, open your eyes. I just think there are times where we don't sit like that. And we don't give God a chance to even talk to us. So Debbie, going back to you write, there's a quote I pulled out of page 36 of Do You Love Me? It says, salvation doesn't make sense if you don't understand what you're being saved from. What is it about either Christians or just people in general or our faith, or maybe it's a culture thing? What is it that's kept us from understanding not just what we're being saved from, but what we're being saved to. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Well, I think it's interesting because a minute ago you said, it was the people that understood their need that came to Jesus. Yeah, good news isn't good news unless there's bad news, And I think especially in our culture where we work so hard to maintain this sense of comfort, it's like, okay, so if I think about when I was little and the gospel was presented to me, it was my escape from hell.
Mhm.
It wasn't my escape from the hell I'm living right now. And most of the time in America, we don't feel the hell we're living right. We work really hard not to feel the hell we're living right now, in the choices that we make on our own. So it's good news that we don't have to go to hell, because that sounds terrible. But it's, in the meantime, we're getting by. And so you have to feel what your life really is without God. You have to feel like, oh, that's not the best choice. Like, I want to say something really bad. We're recording this.
We are.
Okay, I'm just going to say it. I had to come to the realization that I was shitty at my own life. It had to sound like that to me. Like, it had to be that way for me internally. Before doing life with God was like where I wanted to go. And that's its own journey. And so it's got to be actual good news for us to reach out for it. There's got to be some bad news we're actually experiencing about where we are.
I think for some people it is an experience of an addiction that draws your attention to, okay, it's got to be better than this. There's got to be a better way than what I'm doing. For some people, it's anxiety. For me, it was just the burden that this life is not easy and light.
Well, and also what it felt like to have to perform and be responsible and always make it work.
Yeah. I think part of what we're driving at here is, how do we come to that realization short of that kind of an acute experience? So for most of us, we may not have an addictive problem. We may not get to that place where we feel like we've reached the bottom. And yet the reality, there is still something supremely better than the life we're living. And I didn't know what that looked like, or how it worked, or what I had to do, or the process of finding it. I didn't know. I just knew that all of a sudden, I'm not satisfied with where I am. And I think that's where this word disappointment comes in that you're driving at. I've been in business all my life, and one of the things we talk about in business is that change doesn't happen unless the forces for change are greater than the forces that resist change. So bear with me for just a second. I can kind of unpack this just for a second. Yeah. I won't take long. But the forces for change that have been studied in business and science and all that are disappointment. I have to be disappointed with where I am. If there's no disappointment, there will not be change. That's why in the course of our discussions with Cecil this week, we said, before we move on to what change looks like, we have to pause at this disappointment place, because if you're not disappointed in some way, at some level, with the life you're living and the relationship you have right now, the rest of the series, it just isn't going to matter. We have to come to that place of disappointment. Second, we have to have a vision that something more is possible. We don't necessarily know how to get there. We need to know some of the first steps we need to take. But we don't need to know the whole journey. We just need to have a vision that something more is possible, and the burden or the addiction or the anxiety or whatever it is that we're living with that gives us some sense that there's something more that's possible, gives us a sense of disappointment and that a vision that maybe there is a life with God that looks different than the one I have right
That's so good. I appreciate that. You know, I asked these guys to kind of to prep, and I would love to, off of what you just said, or anybody have a story? Because I know my wife's got a really pertinent illustration of recently of hitting that level of dissatisfaction. I mean, you have to be honest with yourself about where you're at. Um, but can you guys have some stories that might quickly illustrate coming to that point of dissatisfaction and God using it to build your faith in some capacity? You want to share
I'll
yours?
share. And Kurt, what you said kind of leads right into what I was thinking. And, we all kind of, we rate pain or disappointment, right? We think, oh, well, what I'm going through is not as bad as what they're going through, or, they're dealing with this, I'm only dealing with this. But the truth is, if we're disappointed, if we're dealing with pain, our pain is real. Whether it's, in the world's eyes greater than theirs or whatever, or less than theirs. But going into the holidays, I was just dealing with a lot of different emotions, a lot of disappointment, a lot of just very emotional things for me. And so when the holidays were approaching, I was super excited. Our daughter and son-in-law were coming in from DC, and I was just excited. The family's all going to be together, and we're going to finally have time to rest and just enjoy family time. Well, we all know what happened on, Christmas morning. He hurt his back mid-December and was dealing with that back pain and went to the doctor, tried different things. Nothing was working. He had pushed and pushed, and then Christmas morning, he literally could not get out of bed. And so I just came to him and I said, I know you don't like this, but I think I'm going to have to call 911. Well, that's what happened. Actually, I called Steve first. I said, okay, Steve, I've never done this before. What do I do? He's like, yeah, it sounds like you're going to have to call 911. And my son opens the front door as these 6 tall paramedics come, into our house and, hook him up to IVs and try multiple pain meds. Nothing's working. They're literally moving furniture in our bedroom to get him onto the stretcher, to get him out to the ambulance. So we, head off to the emergency room and end up spending the night in the hospital, Christmas. And it was just a huge disappointment. It was not what I had expected. So here I am dealing with unmet expectations and disappointment, Well, so a few weeks later, I guess last week, I was talking to a very wise friend of mine about all of this, just processing this and just telling her, I feel like I've been telling my friends I'm a hot mess. Like I just was dealing with so much emotion and disappointment. And as I'm talking to her and processing this with her, I told her, I said, but I know I have so much to be thankful for, and it could always be worse. And I'm not dealing with, what this friend over here is dealing with. And I kept trying to be grateful for what I do have. And she made the comment to me, she goes, when we force ourselves towards gratitude without really dealing with the emotions, the true emotions that we're feeling, she said, we put ourselves in this loop where we just get stuck. And when she said that, it just was like this light bulb went on for me, because I kept telling him, I'm just stuck. And I so appreciated her wisdom and her saying that to me, because it gave me permission to feel what I was feeling, to feel the sadness, to feel the disappointment, to feel the frustration. And I was just so grateful, for those words of wisdom, because we all do that, right? We all go, well, it's not as bad as so-and-so, and I'm not dealing with this, and I'm not dealing with that.
It's good.
now. I think you had a quote last week about pain being God's megaphone, a week or two ago, right? Pain being God's megaphone. And when we move to that place of gratitude, which I get it, I understand why we do that. There's a lot to be thankful for, but when we move quickly there and we don't pause on the pain and we turn off that megaphone, there's no more megaphone. Debbie once said to me, we're either taking layers off the onion of our heart or we're putting them on. And that puts them right on. Which means that someday I'll have to go back to that and peel some of those layers off. And so I think that the word here is that pain is a grand invitation. And that's what it was for you, Sue, in that painful place. There's an invitation to sit with God in this. And that's part of this whole process of something that leads to something different than the life many of us are living.
And by invitation, too, we're not saying that God orchestrates or causes, is the cause of every bit of pain in your life, right? I mean, we live in a broken world, and some things are going to come up. You get in a car accident, but the opportunity is that He's with you in that pain, and He makes Himself more known, and we understand Him more. I know we've talked about this, Debbie, and I want to get to these two bullets that in this whole thing, again, going back to the illustration with your grandson, if we're moving towards something that we don't know, we're unfamiliar with what this is, then how do we even get there, right? And you made two comments this week, and I'm gonna one at a time. I'd like for you to just expand on this, and everybody else can chime in if you'd like. One is you said we need to spend time dreaming about what is possible. Spend time dreaming about what is possible. Talk to me about that for just a second.
Well, yeah. So my grandson Newton, who's Wesley's younger brother, who they both live in Allen now. You'll be glad to know.
Do they have a horse, a pony?
They have a rocking horse.
Sidestep that one.
They seem pretty happy about it.
They are. So Newton was over, and he had gone upstairs and he'd gotten out markers and stuff. And his mom comes in and says, "Did you ask Grammy if you could get that?" And he looked at her so strange. And he said, "No." And she goes, "Well, you need to ask Grammy." He goes, "No, I don't need to ask Grammy." And he goes, "It's there for us. We don't have to ask." And so here now are these little boys that they're starting to understand what it means to have a relationship with Grammy. Like, I don't have to ask. She's got a whole cabinet up there, and it's just ours for the taking. That's a little bit like, how we have to start expanding the vision of what it is to be with God. I think some of that is that we need to pay attention in a different way. So we need to maybe start by meditating on some scriptures. I think this one in Matthew 11 is an interesting one. Like, if just every day for a week you spent 5 minutes just saying, "Oh, well, what would my life look like if it felt less burdensome? If I was yoked with Jesus in a way that made it feel lighter? Like, Lord, help me this week as I go through my stuff to just, tap me on the shoulder when there's an illustration of that. Start expanding my vision of what that looks like." So, or go to Ephesians 3, what would it look like if I was filled up with the love of Christ? If I understood its breadth and depth, till I was filled with the knowledge of God. Or Ephesians 1, where it's like, well, you will know all the riches, Go to some passage that starts casting a vision for you and sit with that. Sit with it a month, 5 minutes a day for a month, and ask God to help you see. Pay attention to the stories of your friends who are having good experiences with God. Take that in, listen, pray about it. Say, "Lord, could that be true of my life too? Like, is this an illustration of the more that I don't understand right now?" So I think there's and just an asking. And then there's a spending time thinking about it, reflecting on it, that helps us to start expanding that view, so that we know, like, we can just get the markers whenever we want.
That's so good. I know that I'm notorious. I have two phases in my life, and I mean I have others, but there's one distinct phase where it's prior to planting a church and post planting a church. Prior to planting a church, I might have had one restless night in my life. post planting a church, I haven't slept in 10 years. I wake up at 2, 3 in the morning and I start creating lists and I run scenarios, and a lot of you are in my scenarios. So there you go. And I'm overwhelmed with this list of, as like Kurt said, I mean, this thing, we got to do this to do this right. We got to do this. And about a month ago, I started the practice of, before I let myself go anywhere else, do I spend any amount of time thanking God for being with me in that moment, starting there. And it's allowing me to actually go back to sleep these days. But as your pastor, I'm telling you, it's taken years to get to that point, because the answers that are out there, the self-help message and the things that we're taking so naturally every day into our lives that are counter to what we're talking about are wrecking our Christian lives. They are ruining our relationship with God. So I like that. Start dreaming. What does it mean that God's with you? Go back to sleep. You're not going to fix anything in the middle of the night, are you? No. Go back to sleep. Rest. Get up the next day and keep walking with Him, right? The second, Kurt.
Cecil, there have been a few little hints. I don't know if you've picked up on that. Debbie said, spend a month reflecting on something. You spend a month reflecting on anything? Like in your life? Have you spent a month reflecting on it, right?
Binging Netflix.
Sue said, yeah.
I'm like,
That is not reflecting.
Okay, there you go. See?
Sue referenced the fact she and a group of women have been in this study series for 2 years, 3 years. Hang on. Where's the magazine cover that says 5 easy steps to? Do these 6 things and you will get. I realized I don't think God is like ever in a hurry. Why am I in a hurry? All the time I'm in a hurry. I would love this life we're talking about in a week, right? No. It's just, this is a part of, I think, what we have to come to a realization of is that it's a multi-year,
Yes.
Soaking and bathing and processing and sitting in, missing invitations, picking up on other ones. It just takes time.
That's so true. And even, we're Monday night, we're starting our 6th semester of Life with God, of the study. And that was one of the things I realized as I was processing what I was going through with my friend. I told her, I said, gosh, I'm just so disappointed in myself. Like, I realized, like, all these emotions, I was trying to process them myself without inviting God into that space of helping me, of like, what do I do with, I'm a hot mess. What do I do with what I'm feeling? And I was I've been through 2.5 semesters. And I was like, gosh, I know this. Like, I know this. This is what I've been learning. And to your point, it's a process. And even after we complete semester 6 in May, I'm still going to screw up. I'm still going to I'm still not going to get it right every time. But hopefully I will be quicker to invite God into that space when I'm struggling, when I'm dealing with this.
And it's not about walking away from those situations feeling ashamed.
Right.
And I missed it. I think that's been one of the beautiful parts of coming to this different realization, is that shame is not God's tool for moving us to a different place. Shame is Satan's tool for us to try to hide. And so nothing about that was surprising to God. Sue, nothing. But the invitation will still be there, And this is the beautiful grace of the Christian life, that it just isn't about being ashamed. I forgot. I know better. I know I can do. Now it's about little by little creating different kinds of habits and different ways of being with God in these times and places.
My friend asked me, she said, take your disappointment to God. What do you see Him saying to you? And I just envisioned him just opening his arms and saying, "Come to me. I'm here." It wasn't this shame on you. How dare you? You should know better. It was just love and acceptance.
Forgive us. We are going to run a few minutes long, but I knew this was going to happen, but I can't cut this short. I hope you're sensing that this is just a pivotal conversation in your faith. Um, I love that idea. Dream about what is possible. Don't let the world tell you to be ashamed of something if God's not saying that, right? He wants the best for you. He wants more for you than you could ever want for yourself. This has got to be rewired in all of us because we don't believe it. Debbie, the second statement I want to get up in front of everybody is this, is to pursue the unfamiliar, to move closer to this. We talked about allowing our dissatisfaction about the status quo to grow. Talk to me about what that means.
Well, we've kind of talked about two different kinds of pain. The pain like when your back goes out, and the pain of your anxiety because you've been living life on your own, are kind of two different kinds of pain. And when I'm talking about the dissatisfaction about the status quo, for us, status quo is doing life on our own. That's normal. We have to allow our dissatisfaction with that to grow. And sometimes that's a little counter to the message that we normally hear in Christianity. Like, we shouldn't be dissatisfied. But when I read the scriptures, God is perfectly happy for us to feel pain when we make the wrong choices. Perfectly happy. In fact, if we don't feel the pain, sometimes he just allows it to just spin out of control. Like, I felt that in my life. Like, probably one of the worst seasons of my life is when my anxiety grew and grew and grew because God was actually shutting down my coping mechanisms, like, that weren't him. And that just, my life felt out of control. And that was a good. This last summer I had a big bout with anxiety and I hated it. And literally for a week I couldn't get out of bed because it just wouldn't leave. And normally, it's like I'd be anxious and then I'd get over it. But all the things I normally do to get over it weren't working. And it took me a while to realize that the anxiety was the invitation. Like, it was the invitation to realize that the way I was coping on my own wasn't going to get me where I wanted to go. And so it was a good that it was growing. It was a good that it wouldn't go away because I needed to awaken. That dissatisfaction needed to grow so that I would actually turn to a different way. And so in this sense, it's good to let the dissatisfaction grow. It's good for you to be honest with yourself and to sit freely and without condemnation with God, with, oh, that didn't work out so good when I tried that on my own. And let yourself feel that, recognize it, take it in, and say, that's probably good motivation to want to do it another way. And that's what I would call holy dissatisfaction. It's not like not being content. It's allowing God to use our own foibles as an invitation to know maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a way to yoke with Jesus that would get me a different kind of life than the life that I've been able to get for myself. Maybe I'd be happier. Maybe I would be freer if I moved toward that. We sang a song about turning to Jesus when temptation comes our way. And it was interesting as we were singing that. I thought, how I've traditionally interpreted that is when I get to something I can't handle on my own, then that's the temptation. But the real temptation is anytime I feel like I want to handle it on my own. Anytime I feel like I don't need you, that's my greatest temptation. That's when I need to turn to you again. Because like the song says, it's every hour, it's every minute. It's a constant reality that we need to be with God.
So good. So we need to wrap up. And as you can tell, this is the beginning. We're just scratching the surface of this conversation. But my heart is that you will be willing to walk with us in the future and to keep picking this conversation up. This week, would you consider for just a few minutes every day sitting and just talking to God about the disappointments in your life? Maybe He's got you in a season where everything's going great. But is it possible that in that great season that you're actually thinking it's great because you're orchestrating everything, you're controlling all of your circumstances, and right now you're really doing life on your own? And that's going to come to a fall at some point. It just will. If God is pursuing you, if you want to walk with Him, He's going to make sure that it comes to a point somewhere, because He wants you to depend more on Him. And He wants that goodness of Himself in your life that you don't even know about yet. He's ready to give it. That's what He's inviting you into. So would you consider this week maybe just taking some time and sitting with that dissatisfaction, trying to see it, asking God to show you how it can be an invitation to understand not just your brokenness, but how good He is.